Hi, I'm Dr. Erin Basinger. I'm an assistant professor of communication studies at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and I'm excited to talk to you today a little bit about my approach to research methods and why I think research methods is so important. Generally, I study health and interpersonal communication, and the process that I'm most interested in is coping. So, the goal of my research is to find out how people manage a variety of stressors, and especially the way that those stressors show up in people's relationships. I generally am guided by a theoretical framework called communal coping, and so most of my work has to do with some aspect of communal coping, which is just coping in interpersonal relationships. So I've done some measurement work on communal coping, some theoretical work on communal coping, some more kind of contextual work on communal coping, but that's where most of my research kind of resides, is in the process of communal coping. Some of the contexts that I've studied communal coping in are grief and loss. I've studied chronic illness pretty extensively, and especially type 2 diabetes, military relationships, and then a few other things, mental health and things like that. In terms of the paradigm that I use, I straddle post-positivism and the interpretive paradigm. I'll talk a little bit more later about why I've chosen to take that approach of situating myself pretty centrally into different paradigms, which isn't always a very common approach. But we gain very different kinds of information depending on the paradigm that we use. And so I have found that for myself, it is very useful to be well trained and well positioned in multiple paradigms. Although the programs that I went to for my master's and my PhD were primarily post-positive programs, and so I got my training sort of in creative ways in the interpretive paradigm. The methods that I use accordingly with the paradigms that I use are both quantitative and qualitative. In terms of quantitative research, I mostly do survey research. In terms of qualitative research, I've done interviews and focus groups, and I've also done some analysis of conversations that happen in online forums. And what's really unique about that kind of setting is that those conversations are naturally occurring. So instead of interviews where the researcher is asking questions of the participants, these are conversations people are already having. And so you get a different kind of validity from that kind of research. In the qualitative realm, I use grounded theory methods quite a bit, but also have done some thematic analysis as well. There are a lot of skills that are important when you're learning research methods, and research methods can feel incredibly overwhelming when you're learning it as a new researcher, as an undergraduate. But there are some kind of basic things that I think are so important to focus on when you're a student of research methods or when you're a budding researcher. One thing I think is important is to have literacy in a variety of methods. Research articles can be really dense, they can be really tough to get through, they can be pretty boring, and it can be tempting to gloss over a really tough results section, maybe one that's very heavy on advanced statistics, or what feels like a very boring research methods section when you're kind of slugging through details about measurements or details about recruitment. But those decisions that researchers make ultimately inform whether their research is credible, kind of how we can interpret people's research, how we can put research in conversation with other research or with theory. And so ultimately, it's important to know how to read a variety of different kinds of methods, so that we can work with researchers across the field. If I can't even understand the research that you've done, it's going to be impossible for us to work together. So it's important for research methods students to put in the work to figure out how to read an article across a different variety of methods and paradigms. Another skill that's important is integrating theory and research. So understanding the relationship between theory and how that informs the research choices that we make. And I'll talk about that more in a few minutes. And then I also think that there are some really important building blocks that you can learn in a research methods class, that everything else kind of builds on those things. So it's sort of like when you're learning a foreign language, if you don't ever learn how to conjugate verbs, you're never going to be able to be fluent in that conversation. The same thing is true with research methods. If you don't learn how to operationalize a variable well, if you don't learn how to build a good survey, if you don't learn how to write an interview protocol, those are not things that you can just do naturally. Those are skills that people have to develop over time. And it's a mistake to think that just anyone can write a good survey or just anyone can come up with an interview protocol. If you don't get those basic things right, nothing else is going to fall into place either. One project that I'm working on right now that I'm really excited about is about body shame and pregnancy. This was born out of my research on type 2 diabetes, actually. So I started out in my PhD program studying type 2 diabetes, and I've continued that over the last few years. One of the things that I kept confronting in this diabetes research and when I would talk to people with type 2 diabetes is that a lot of them experienced body-related stigma when they were dealing with family members and romantic partners and healthcare providers, and people would kind of look at diabetes as a fat person's disease, which it isn't, but that's sort of the cultural signifier for diabetes. And so I started to research and start to understand how body stigma was impacting people with diabetes. That led me to an interest in how body stigma affects people in other health contexts, and pregnancy is one that really stuck out to me. And so across the pregnancy trajectory, when people are trying to get pregnant, when they are pregnant, when they're in labor, and even postpartum, there's a lot of stigma that comes for people who are in larger bodies, who are pregnant, and for lots of different reasons. And so two other researchers and I have collected some qualitative data using a framework called memorable messages, where we had people recall messages that really stuck out to them that different people, romantic partners, family members, providers, strangers, the media, communicated to them about their bodies during the pregnancy kind of trajectory. The reason I think that this project is so important is that it really highlights how communication with other people has a very real and often very tangible impact on our health outcomes. And during a time like pregnancy, that is very challenging, regardless of your body size, those outcomes are incredibly meaningful. So we're working on analyzing those data right now, and I'm really excited about that project. One methods topic that I could talk about for a very long time, and that I have talked about a lot in the research methods classes that I've taught, is the importance of remaining open to different methods and paradigms. It can be incredibly tempting when you are an undergraduate or graduate student, or even a new researcher, to define yourself by a particular paradigm or a particular method. There's nothing wrong over time with sort of becoming an expert in a method and really dedicating yourself to that. But I do think there's a danger when you do that too early, when you decide at the beginning, I'm a quantitative researcher, or I'm a qualitative researcher, or I only do work in this or that paradigm. I always encourage my students not to get married to a paradigm or a method too early, and to approach their relationship to different paradigms like dating. It's too early for you to get married. You don't know these people well enough. The most you can do is have an open relationship, right? Like, you need to be open to getting to know different paradigms and different methods. The reason that that's important is that different paradigms and different methods allow you to answer different research questions. I can't answer every research question using survey methods or quantitative data analysis. And likewise, I can't answer every question that I have with interpretive research, with grounded theory, with interview methods. And so remaining open to different kinds of methods and being willing to put in the hard work of being trained in a variety of methods ultimately just allows you to put more tools in your tool belt and be able to answer lots of different types of questions. So by remaining open in my own research, I have been able to answer a much wider variety of research questions than I could have if I had wedded myself to one paradigm really early on. I think that that has made my ability to develop theory much stronger, my ability to see measurement and methods much stronger and broader. And it's also made me a much better teacher of research methods because my knowledge is broader than it would have been had I married a particular paradigm when I was just starting out. And so I always tell my students, learn how to read a bunch of different methods, learn how to do a bunch of different methods, so that you can ultimately answer more research questions in a better way. So I wish you luck in your research methods training, but mostly I wish you openness to different paradigms and methods.